if you are persuaded by my argument that the government of Afghanistan, and indeed the system, is not capable of producing a credible partner, and I think the record of the last 8 years, including 2009, is unequivocal, then you cannot justify spending $100 billion a year and committing 100,000 American troops and 40,000 troops for our allies to a mission that cannot be accomplished.
So what's the alternative?
Well, wait a minute. This is a waste of national security resources, and frankly, it's immoral. It's immoral to commit people to risk their lives for a mission that cannot be accomplished. If it cannot be accomplished, it should not be done, because we actually have other uses for our troops and other uses for the money. And so what I would say is we should scale back what we're doing in Afghanistan to things that are achievable. And what is it that's achievable? I see three things. First, supporting the non-Pashtun parts of the country where the Taliban has no support, but where there's some infiltration. This doesn't require very much assistance because these parts of the country are actually pretty well armed on their own. But this would essentially mean the North and the Central Highlands. Second, to protect Kabul, which is relatively secure and with a city of 4 million. And you don't want it to descend into Baghdad-type chaos, Baghdad circa 2006. Again, that doesn't require a huge number of troops. And finally, a counterterrorism mission, meaning that where there is actionable intelligence about terrorist activities, you strike. And I would guess that would require about, I'm pulling these figures out of the air, somewhere around 15,000 troops. And again, I just want you to look at this, think of this as a part of the war on terror. We are committing 140,000 of the best troops in the world. To fight whom? 35,000, 40,000 Taliban fighters who are part-time, not particularly well-trained, ragtag army. We're spending $100 billion a year. The CIA estimates that the Taliban budget is between $70 and $200 million a year. Incidentally, almost all of which comes from us, because the trucks that we use to supply our troops in Afghanistan go from port of Karachi. We contract it out, and the contractors pay off the Taliban to pass through, and that's how they finance themselves. So, just consider, how even we, the United States, can we really afford to win a war on terror when we spend $100 billion to an enemy that's spending $70 million? You know, we're not going to be able to afford very many battles like that. And if that's the approach we're taking, then we risk actually losing the war on terror.
Michael, do you have a response or a question?
Well, it's very eloquent, and generally I don't have fundamental disagreements with most of the points, but let me add some nuance and then say why I do disagree for this moment in 2010 about policy. Peter obviously was hopeful on the policy, I would assume it's fair to say, through at least last summer, or he wouldn't have bravely and courageously done what he did and gone to Afghanistan to work there full time. I may wind up by summer 2011 in his camp. So part of what we're debating here is, when do you make the call, the tough call that it's failed? What I'm saying is the time Peter went over was very shortly into the phase of serious intensive devotion of Western resources to this mission, after 7 years of not doing so. At the end of the Bush administration, we began to see increases in forces. We had about 20,000 Americans through basically when the Iraq surge began. We got up to about 30,000 when George W. Bush left. Only in the early months of the Obama administration under General McKiernan did we then add a few more brigades, and then we put in several more brigades under the McChrystal strategy, which is the first time we did a bottom-up counterinsurgency calculation about what's required. And what I'm saying is, given the stakes, given the previous investment, and I don't want to argue in favor of reinforcing failure, but I do want to point out we've been at this for a while, and we've come to a fairly decent knowledge base about Afghanistan now among our military, among much of our diplomatic corps. We're only now trying seriously. The Afghan army is only now benefiting from this 85% partnership with NATO forces. The basic logic of what we're doing now would be expected to start to show results in the next year or so. If it doesn't, I'm going to be hard-pressed to continue to support the strategy come next summer. But we haven't been trying this very long. And so my disagreement with Peter is about timing. I would say this is not the moment to lose our verve. This is the moment to see if these fledgling institutions can be built up. And I remain hopeful because of what I see particularly with the Afghan army. Let me say one or two other very small, quick things. Peter's backup strategy, which, by the way, I'm not going to critique because in a year I could be endorsing it myself. And more importantly, as strategists, we need to be thinking about backup plans, and I think it's a reasonably well-articulated backup plan. But this strategy says, well, yes, Kabul's important, let's help them in Kabul. You know what? We're not helping them that much in Kabul today because we're actually seeing some ability by local Afghan security forces, the best ones, admittedly, because the politicians want the best ones there, to secure their own capital. Now, yes, they still have car bombings. Yes, they still get some limited help, but they are doing the overwhelming majority of the work there, and even the Afghan police are showing a little bit of promise inside of Kabul. So while we're talking about specific strategies for specific countries, let's also take note of what is working. There are the beginnings of hope in some of these Afghan institutions, and I think it's hope worth building upon.
Thank you. Can we open it up to the audience? Now, I have a light shining in my eyes, and I'm very low down as well, so please wave your hand like a madman or a madwoman, and then we'll take a few questions and we'll go from there. Okay, question here. Yep, can we get the microphones around there? Yeah, please stand up and name an organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Clemens with the New American Foundation. Michael, I think John had it a bit wrong. You were not a fan of the invasion of Iraq, as I remember it. And in fact, in the spring of 2004, you and Jim Steinberg wrote one of the most powerful pieces advocating U.S. withdrawal from Iraq. My question is, it was a very important piece. What conditions do you think are not being met today in Afghanistan that were being met in the article that you wrote in spring of 2004 with Jim Steinberg with regard to Iraq? What is different in your position? I know you changed your mind on Iraq later, but you wrote the leading piece of the top 2 Democratic national security experts at that time on why Iraq was wrong and why U.S. forces had to come home. What is not being met in the Afghanistan case that was being met for you at that point in Iraq?
Okay, can you hold up 1 second? We have another question on this table we will go to. Yep.
Judy Miller, journalist. Peter, I'd like to ask you, what are the implications of this strategy for Pakistan? And what do you say to all of the Afghans whom we abandoned after the great victory over the Soviet Union and left them to the wiles of the Taliban? What do you say to the women of the country and the people who've stood up and fought with us? Thank you.
Michael, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Well, no, I was a qualified supporter of the invasion, but Steve's right. I also, in 2004, wrote this article with Jim Steinberg. And the basic thing that we were recognizing at that time was an extraordinarily strong anti-American reaction on the part of Iraqis, which we did not think necessarily guaranteed defeat, but we did think that a rough exit schedule would be desirable to send the message to Iraqis that we were not latter-day colonialists. And frankly, in retrospect, I think we probably proposed too fast of a timeline, even for what we knew at the moment. I won't, Jim probably stands by his position, but for myself, I would argue that, even if the basic premise of that article was correct, we were probably a little bit too rushed in our proposal to get out within 18 months or something, but there was still no sense of giving up immediately. There was a sense of trying to help then Lieutenant General David Petraeus complete the training mission, and we didn't, see how bad the sectarian violence would get. Once it got so bad, there was no way you could leave in a year and a half or 2 years.